Now, very happy to say that our next guest is with us. She has played 96 times for the Irish Sevens team over the last 5 years, 37 caps in there, including the Sevens World Cup in San Francisco in 2018. Before that, there was football for Kerry, All-Ireland final in 2012, and basketball for Ireland. And you might have seen in the last few days, she's decided to hang up her Sevens boots, at least. Louise Galvin, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So that's quite the CV, bloody hell. Your last appearance in February in Sydney for the Sevens. So was it at the back of your mind this might be your last year? Has COVID kind of jumped in to accelerate things? What's behind the decision?
Yeah, it was in the back of my mind that it was going to be my last year, but usually the season ends up around July or August. So certainly in February I wasn't thinking that this was going to be my last tournament. Actually, ironically, we played in Hamilton, New Zealand before we went to Sydney, and the Chinese team were being told they weren't allowed back into China because it had started to take off. So I remember all the teams talking about this coronavirus, and we were like, oh my God, China have to just stay in New Zealand and Australia. They're not being left back in because they're being protected for the Olympics. Little did we know, etc. Fast forward a few months later. We actually still went on a training tournament in early March in France, and again, like the very first week of March. And that was pretty much the last, I suppose, team training that I was a part of. We were training in isolation then from March on until I decided in the last few weeks that I'd go ahead with the plan and retire this season, because I guess with COVID, I just don't know when Sevens in particular is going to get back up running again, unfortunately.
I know, by its very nature, globetrotting, it just is not compatible with COVID in particular.
Yeah, it's the international travel. It's all the teams involved. Whereas 15's game, you can have one home team that are resident and one team travelling, and then even the day itself. I feel really sorry for World Rugby and HSBC and all the different unions that are trying to find the safest and best way to get it back up and running again. Because by its nature, you see how precise the game times are. If you've a double tournament, men's and women's, you could have 40 teams playing in one stadium. You're probably sharing a dressing room with two other teams, and it works because it's fluid. One team is out warming up, one team is eating, one team is cooling down, and there's probably only one team at any stage in the dressing room. But now when you think of social distancing and wiping down surfaces, the day of a Sevens tournament is so jam-packed, there's very little time to manoeuvre anywhere. So they're going to find it very, very difficult to get this back up and running again safely. But I'm sure they will, because obviously being in the Olympics as well, it's just I think it's after the Rugby World Cup, it is an important money spinner for World Rugby. So I'm sure in 2021 they're getting it back up and running. But unfortunately for the likes of me, they just kept cancelling tournaments that were up and coming until we can get a hold of this thing.
And is there any concrete word on a resumption? The 15s is starting to eke out some kind of calendar, thankfully. Sevens is still very much on hold.
Very much on hold, yeah. So they've cancelled the start of the 2021 season, and at the moment we're still, we I guess I'm gonna have to stop saying that, but they're hoping that I think Hong Kong in April is the next tournament that hasn't been cancelled, that is on schedule. Okay. And they're putting in all these contingency plans, because obviously the Olympics are going to be on in August, and they need teams and countries to have had a serious amount of game time to be able to put on the show that the sport deserves. So they need to have a minimum amount of whether they be regional tournaments or World Series tournaments, in order to allow teams to get up to that speed so that they can hopefully hit Tokyo at 100 miles an hour.
What an unexpected journey these last 5 years have been, I suspect. You joined the squad at 27, probably travelled the world. This was not on your radar at 22, 23, 24, that's for sure.
No, my radar, when I look back now, I think I probably would think I would have a very comfortable job, probably have a mortgage, probably be nice and settled down, play a little bit of sport at the weekends. But something inside me decided to throw all that out the window. Yeah, in my mid to late 20s, when I got offered the opportunity to play pretty much a new sport, move to Dublin, give up my job. But although I may not be as rich in the bank as if I'd stayed working full time, I'm all the more richer for the experiences and for just the opportunity to play full time as a professional athlete. Like as a female team sport, it was the only one in Ireland that was doing this back in 2015. And like just to be able to maximise my potential as an athlete, that was always my goal, because I just love playing any sort of ball team sport. And then it turned out that rugby sevens actually was a nice fit as well. And as you mentioned, like traveling around the world, like it was insane. Like Sydney, New Zealand, San Francisco, Russia, South Africa, America, Canada. Been to some amazing places, and all while playing sport. Like again, growing up as a girl, I never even thought this was a dream that it was possible. So, like as I look back, and there are plenty of regrets as well, particularly not going to the Olympics, which was probably the ultimate goal of when I joined, was I wanted to become an Olympian. But I still look back on, man, you've been pretty lucky. Like,
yeah, it's been a pretty good deal. So just to broadly get the timeline, I know you played a lot of GAA up until you were maybe 13, 14, and there was no girls team, and the boys started physically developing, and that became tough. And basketball stepped in, and then you went back to the GAA. Is it somewhere around 2013 territory? You lose a bet and you take up rugby, and is it within kind of 2 years of taking it up that you find yourself attracting interest from the RFU?
Probably, yeah, something like that. Like I was playing a bit of tag in the summers just to keep a bit of fitness, bit of crack really in Limerick. And that was pretty good crack. And then it was around 13, 14, obviously the women won the Grand Slam. In 14, they beat New Zealand, as we all well know by now. And you could see something stirring, and they're obviously making a lot of changes in terms of the sport structures within the game. So I started playing a little bit of 15s, and yeah, I loved it. I actually really liked the physicality, that aspect of it, but wasn't really ready to leave basketball or football either, particularly football, because we'd had, unfortunately, my inter-county career completely coincided with Cork's inter-county career. I was actually laughing with Angela Walsh. She messaged me on just to say well done on retiring, and I was saying, well, they could probably thank half the Cork footballers, because you were just so dominant at the time that I thought, here, I might as well try something else, because we're not getting, or we might get them in Munster and All Ireland semi-final or final, they catch us again. So it was pretty hard to step away from them. But then I think when you leave something behind, you're actually more driven to succeed, because you realise I've stepped away from something that was pretty good as well. So I really better make a good hand at this, like.
Yes, this better be worth it. And was I, so I mean, I guess, you make the point about mortgage and finances and how do you balance that up with the experiences that you've had. But in advance of accepting the move up to Dublin and going full time, was anybody in your life saying, oh, I don't know if this is such a good idea, or did you seek advice? Are you that type?
My parents.
Yeah, naturally.
100%. I don't know though, were they using the whole job more so to stop me from leaving football, because I come from a real GAA background. So I don't know, was it the football more than the job? But they were a bit like, what are you doing? But they were kind of asking other people. And in fairness, I'm not a very flippant person. I'm pretty like I made sure I had my degree. I had a good bit of work experience under my belt. So while I was playing the program, I mean, there's definitely loads of opportunities. Did a master's part-time. I made sure I kept my physio competencies up, did loads of part-time locuming work, which has allowed me, thankfully, to step back into that workplace. Especially, in healthcare, there's a good chance you're going to get a job anyway, because it's always going to be necessary, and that's none more evident than it is right now. So I kind of always had that idea that, look, if you take this break and step away, you work hard enough, you're going to make the most of this. Your career and the experience you've gained so far, it's not worth nothing. You can still maintain that. And again, I'm not sure would I've done a master's if I didn't kind of have that extra bit of time of it. It's something that sits nicely with being a professional athlete. You have that bit of extra downtime where if you have on your own time, you can do a little bit of extra study. So I kind of always knew I would do something with it. I'd make the most of it, because again, if you make a big enough choice, if you're stepping away from things. I actually really liked my job as well in the hospital in Limerick. I wasn't looking for a change, which is the ironic thing, but I think again, you step away from things you like, from friends, from a comfort zone, then you're more likely to actually make a go of what you have immersed yourself in.
What was the hardest thing to get grips with when it came to rugby then?
Probably the tackling and rucking, and not so much the not the physicality of it, but the technicality of it. Like I'm quite I'm not very tall, but I'm quite long-limbed, and
For radio listeners, Louise has stretched out her arms just to prove the point.
Stretched arms strong. Yeah, like I've quite like long legs and a shorter body, so even just to get that tackle height of carrying, you know, dropping your height in your carries, getting lower in tackles, that was probably that was definitely the hardest. I think for a lot of us in sevens program, we would have developed a lot from other sports. So, you know, footwork, stepping people, even the fitness was okay. It was difficult. Like sevens rugby, international rugby is the hardest sport I've ever played, and I ever think I will play. It is just relentless. But again, you can train for that. But just around that kind of tackle height, ruck height, that technicality around that was definitely the most difficult thing.
There is a glamour to the circuit, there's no doubt. Cool locations, there's a party atmosphere around the game. So, you know, we could all be mistaken on the outside for thinking it's a, you know, it's a great time and everybody's in the tear and, you know, it's a bit of a jolly. It's not. I mean, you talked about the fitness levels. I presume you guys are all wrecked at the end of these tournaments.
Absolutely exhausted. Absolutely shattered, yeah. The most wrecked I've ever been, because you're probably staring into a long haul flight the next day. And again, everyone's probably like, oh, boo-hoo, you're coming back from Sydney in 30-degree heat. But actually, I just remember that last tournament, I think we hit 38, 39 degrees. We actually had to borrow, we'd have, you know, quite top edge sports science, and the medical team around us are all fantastic. We'd have access to a lot of facilities, but we actually borrowed some of these, like, zip up ice jackets from, I think it was the Giants, the AFL team, for warming up in, because it was touching 40 degrees. And like, it's absolutely disgusting. 7 minutes in, and you think 7 minutes is so short, but 7 minutes of flat out rugby is just like you're gone at half time. So although, yeah, you do see a lot of glamour around it, like, they're just such hectic days. You're up so many hours beforehand, you're eating so many hours beforehand, it's just go, go, go. Then you try and switch off after a game for like 20 minutes before you start to switch on again for the next game. They're just absolutely manic, and you're shattered by the end of it. It takes a real good week to get over it, and that's even if you don't have that much jet lag.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what's the vibe out there? Because the opposition teams are obviously spending a bit of time together, or they're coming off, you're coming on. There's probably warm-ups happening. I think often hotels are shared as well. Is it pretty collegiate, and you could have a chinwag with some opposition players, or you know, pretty much this is our circle and no one's coming in?
No, it's very collegiate. It's very, very friendly. 100%, you're right. Generally, we are all in one hotel, or it might be, if it's even male and female, it might be both male and female teams with one hotel, and you're eating just in an area for players. You're getting on and off buses. You're very chatty. Like, to be honest, you're, you know, sometimes you hear about the different stories of here, like, was it the Kerry Donegal final in 2014 of your man blowing the trees in Stewart Stadium? I mean, you could easily probably spy on someone, because we're all on the one training grounds. Like, you're literally getting off on bus, on and on the bus. But it's kind of an unwritten rule that, you know, the coaches, they're not looking at plays. And to be honest, so much of sevens is open play rather than what happens in a starter playing rate. It's not like a Joe Schmidt trick play is going to unlock any sort of a game. It's you might see something, but it mightn't help you that much when you're absolutely blowing 4 minutes into the second half anyway. So it's very, very collegiate, very much like you still sit very much with your own team, right. But you could easily you're getting a cup of tea or a coffee after dinner, after breakfast, you're absolutely having a chat with whoever's in front of you, behind you, and you start to build up those relationships. And yeah, it's pretty nice. It's really interesting to see how other teams prepare as well. I mean, how some are like the Fijians, they're just brilliant. Like, they're the most relaxed nation. I remember outside Sydney one year, there was a bedding company that was selling mattresses, and I was coming back from one warm up, and there they were actually inside on the mattresses that were just for, you know, just for show, like just for a bit of advertising, and they were dead sound asleep. And I mean, they were in their gear, they could have been playing just after us, and just works. They still get you know, they cross the white line. They're incredibly difficult to play against, and they have their own style. But I'm like, man, that would be unreal. I wish you could just switch off and fall asleep in a mattress in 30-degree heat if I just saw one sitting there.
It kind of sounds like the ideal sporting environment, you know, in the very best sense, people getting on, and then when you cross the white line, it's hell for leather. But that sounds like a really lovely atmosphere. You're going to miss this a lot then. every day together, full-time professional. No one wants to leave that WhatsApp group when they have to step away. And I saw you did an interview with the Irish Rugby website, and you talked about, good times and tough times. I know you talked about your father passing away last year, and the team were very much there for you. There's an intimacy about these kind of teams.
Yeah, there is, because even more than like for an international team, we don't go back to many clubs, any provinces. So we are the residents of the High Performance Centre for the last year and a half, which is a phenomenal facility as well. You're seeing the same people in and out, and then you're traveling. I mean, even the coaching staff, we such a bond with them compared to maybe other teams, because you're spending so much time in each other's pockets. You know their kids' names, you know their family names, you know what other interests they have, what films they're watching. It just comes with the territory. So trying to step away from that is really difficult. And you mentioned leaving a WhatsApp group, but an environment like that, what you don't realise is there's probably about 7 WhatsApp groups until there's a message into the nutrition group, and you have to leave that, and the S&C group and the bulletproof group. Yeah. Actually, I'm not even sure if I've left all the groups at this stage, but yeah, look, it is difficult. I think with COVID, it was a real surreal way of leaving, because I physically haven't had that training environment since last March. And I remember us leaving going, all right, lads, it was over the weekend. It was a case that we weren't coming back in, rather than on a Friday being told, this is the story. It was like, right, see you Monday. And then Sunday evening, we're told we're not coming back in. And I've met players for coffee or whatever, but I haven't met the group as a whole. So it has been a bit of a surreal way to end. As the group were getting back training, I was staying working while I was still kind of figuring out what to do and just training remotely. But then when the decision, it just became a bit more obvious that I'm lucky in ways that I'm going out in my own terms. I have picked up a few injuries, and in sevens, the injuries are just as bad, if not worse, than in 15s, because, okay, you mightn't have the same size of players colliding, but the force, because of the speed they're going at, they're just as time consuming. I'm lucky enough I'm not absolutely crippled. I can still step away. I can play club rugby, who I'm delighted to go back to, because, as you mentioned, I joined UL Bows in Limerick in 2013, and I haven't played a whole pile because we haven't been released. Back playing club football. Was extremely lucky to win an intermediate county final 2 weekends ago with the club down in Kerry. So the parents are very happy again, and they've gotten their way. So look, in another year or so, I could be waiting. There could be still no tournaments. I could be running out of form. I felt I was probably starting to slow down compared to some of the younger players anyway. And I've been lucky enough to get married in the last year or so as well. And so I guess when that happens, you have to start thinking of someone else besides yourself, because I always think as athletes, we're the most selfish individuals going, because the team always comes first. But now it's time to maybe just refocus priorities a little bit.
Yeah. So life now is obviously very interesting for lots of people, yourself very much included. I was reading that you're a physiotherapist, for anyone who doesn't know, and you're working in Tullamore Hospital, as I understand it, assisting patients who've been discharged from ICU, is it?
Yeah, so initially I was working in Tullamore. I actually just got in straight away after lockdown happened. Again, lucky enough, I'd had that ICU experience, and they were looking for staff to help out. So I was there for pretty much the real hardcore, full hazmat suits, working inside there with the Connor, the main physio, and the staff. I had been working there for the last few months, but it was always kind of on a locum, kind of week-to-week basis. So I've actually, since I've stepped away from sevens, I've taken a position with the HSE in Dublin, where I'm living, so a bit less of the commute in southeast, the community. So I've actually jumped from that kind of ICU acute experience to working with doing domiciliary home visits with elderly people who, quite the opposite, more so they have been, I suppose, the effect of COVID on them is this kind of collateral damage of they've been stuck in their homes. They're a lot less mobile. They're a lot less likely to be going outside, and they don't want to become burdens on themselves, their family, or society. So trying to encourage them to get more mobile, make sure they can get around their house and get out into the communities again. So it's a bit of a cradle to the grave stuff, all right. But again, I'm just delighted to be back in full-time employment and to have the opportunity to do that, whilst also kind of find my own sporting regime and routine now, because I don't have the RFU feeding me and sending me gym programs, and I still have the GPS unit because of COVID. I haven't been back in, but I haven't turned it on because 23 weeks of doing 3-4 running sessions a week, I'm okay with leaving that aside for a little while.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, the ICU experience for somebody with COVID, I presume, is utterly terrible.
Yeah, it is. Like, and we had a few cases in Tullamore that they were transferred from like different hospitals in Dublin and from the Midlands where their ICUs are full. So these people, when they were starting to wake up, they don't know where they are. Everyone's in these crazy hazmat suits. They don't know who they are. They're being told they're in Offaly. Half of them are like, why am I in Offaly?
Of all places, why Offaly?
No, I know. But and then there's a Kerry woman here beside me. I'm really confused now. But it was incredibly rewarding because I think a lot of people felt so helpless during that whole time, that whole period, especially if they couldn't work, that I was just delighted to be able to get into that environment, to be able to help out. The nurses are phenomenal, and they were just excellent, brilliant at as well, keeping that communication channel open with the next of kin and the family, because it was so difficult for them. Yeah, it was actually a really rewarding experience. I also thought, like, I'm young, fit and healthy. I'm not going home to anyone that's immunosuppressed. Why not me going into this environment and helping out, and looking back thinking, well, I didn't just stay at home and run around the field during that time. I actually utilised some of the skills and experiences I had before.
And I don't know what you've seen with patients then discharged from ICU, but increasingly we're hearing from perfectly healthy people like yourself who might have run 3-4 times a week and were flying around the place, got COVID and got over it, and aren't really being treated for anything anymore, but are just wiped, 6 months on, can't walk up the stairs, palpitations, sometimes still haven't got their sense of taste or smell back. I don't know, were you seeing a real variety in terms of the after effects for people?
Yeah, a little bit of variety, but very much that level of fatigue and this shortness of breath on very minimal exertion was a huge issue. And unfortunately as well, I guess the way our health service is often set up is that we've a large emphasis on the acute services. So when everyone's in ICU, people want to know how many numbers are in ICU, who get out of ICU, are they alive? Brilliant. But to what end are they having what quality of life are they having? And I actually often felt sorry. We often saw in the news patients being wheeled out of hospital in a wheelchair, and they're being told to wave, and they have masks on, and they're being told that they're the survivors, they're the golden children. Their quality of life is completely different. And in our rehab services have probably never been good enough, never been resourced enough, and now they're even under-resourced more because they're not considered a priority enough to stay running during the COVID era. And plus staff, a lot of our allied health staff are physios, OTs, speech and language therapists, they're being redeployed to swabbing. So for the average Joe watching on the news, looking at ICU numbers and seeing people survive, it's great. But we also need to reintegrate these people back into their homes, their normal lives in society. And we're definitely not meeting that demand at the moment. And it's difficult. It's really, really tough. I don't have any answers, but I can just observe that and kind of report it back that we do need to pick up our rehabilitation. It's not about just getting people alive and out of ICU. If they're used to being in full-time employment and right now they can't walk upstairs, well, there's a big mismatch between their baseline and where they're at now. Yeah,
no, for sure. It's a really good point, and I suspect they're doing everything they can, but it's probably coming, as you said, from a low enough base, that whole area of medicine in Ireland. You're seeing social media is no barometer of anything, but you're seeing pictures of, you don't want to say young people, but like predominantly just like young people dancing in the street and almost making a point lately of saying, well, we're getting on with our lives. And then on the other hand, you are seeing people of similar ages who 6 months on are really struggling with the thing. And you're just wondering, how can we get this message out that, yes, you may not die from it, you may come through it okay, but there's a chance this thing will wipe you for who knows how long,
Wipe you, and God knows what it'll do to someone who has an even lower immune system than you, that you probably know and potentially live with and love, and a family member. It's difficult because I always turn around and I say to Donnacha, my husband, I'm like, thank God we got married in December. We were probably the last wedding that got done before this happened.
Yeah.
And look, we're fit and healthy. No one in our family is immunosuppressed. We can go to work. Life is. I keep thinking the perspective. I'm a big fan of reframing things with perspective. Life is pretty good because our worries are so much less than other people's. But it's difficult, like if you're trying to do a leaving cert, trying to start college, you'd all these ideas and plans, and you see older siblings got that experience and now you don't. I know it is really, really difficult, and it's hard to have that perception of what, you know, maybe before something really bad actually isn't that bad, but now they don't have that, I suppose, life experience of really serious illness, of people passing away, and hopefully they don't. And it's up to us to somehow get that message across. Now, I'm not sure it's paying social media influencers just to tell them to wear a mask, but we need to find a way of finding out how we can survive and live in this and look after our mental health, but also and tolerate everyone and what everyone believes, but also protecting ourselves and definitely the most vulnerable people in our society as well. And it's not going to be easy. I know I, for one, I'm so glad sport got back up and running. Like, the irony is, since I've retired, someone said to me, you know, are you playing anything now? I'm like, now I'm playing more, because when I was when you're contracted with sevens, all you can do is sevens. Whereas as soon as I retired, I was like, right, back to club rugby, back to club football, and I'm part of 2 teams again. But I also have to always assess, well, you know, I'm dealing with vulnerable people in the community. I need to make sure I'm responsible when I'm going down to training, stepping away from training again, and involving yourself in different groups. And I think that's up to every single one of us to always check in with our own symptoms and our own contacts to make sure what we're doing is safe, and that if you turn around and say you're a positive contact in the morning, that you were responsible in your movements in the time before that. And hopefully then you're just being a good example to the people around you as well.
Well, listen, the best of luck with all that work. I mean, it's so important, and I hope it continues to go well. And congrats on the sevens career. I mean, like we said at the start, what a brilliant, unexpected journey it was. But 5 years done. Congrats, Louise. Enjoy semi-retirement. Thanks a mil.
Thanks very much.